Hi. In this short lecture, I want to begin talking with you about types of nonverbal communication. So, when we study things like body position and motion, we're studying kinesics. So, with kinesics, we look at things like body orientation and posture. Body orientation is simply the degree to which we face toward or away from someone with our body, feet, and head when we communicate with them. And posture, of course, you already know, right? Posture is something that you've probably been talked to about your whole life, right? It's important to have good posture. So posture is all about slouching, standing tall, laying down, etc., right? It's all about the different ways that you hold yourself. And we can see the importance of posture in communication just in the way that we talk, in our figures of speech. So, for example, we might say something like, I'm not going to take this lying down. And of course, when we say things like that, we're saying, well, I'm not going to take this easily, right? I'm not going to accept this. And so you see, right? We even refer to posture when we talk about communicating with people and dealing with different kinds of situations. So kinesics also studies gestures. Now, gestures, of course, are just bodily movement, and that can be interpreted as nonverbal communication. And many scholars think that this is probably the oldest form of human communication. We gesture to one another, point to things when we want them, and just to let people know how we're feeling, our goals, our desires, etc. Right? Now, the most common form of gestures that we use are known as illustrators, and illustrators are movements that go along with words but can't really stand on their own. Emblems, on the other hand, are gestures that can stand all by themselves. Things like nodding your head for yes or shaking your head for no. Adapters are another form of nonverbal communication, and generally are unconscious bodily movements, so movements that we don't make on purpose in response to our environment. So shivering, for example, when it's cold is an adapter, is an example of an adapter. Manipulators are forms of self-touching behaviors that are often signs of discomfort. So, for example, someone might pinch the bridge of their nose if they're irritated or if they have a headache, right? So manipulators are when we touch ourselves in ways that often exhibit signs of discomfort. So, when we talk about nonverbal forms of expression, clearly the face and the eyes come into play, right? And the number and variety of facial expressions are virtually unlimited. We can make all different kinds of combinations with our face and with our eyes. And sometimes these come through in the form of what we call micro expressions. And these are expressions that appear very briefly and usually show up in relatively high risk situations. So, for example, if I'm really frightened, but I'm trying to cover it up, right? I might leak or exhibit micro expressions of fear, but then quickly correct them, right? So again, micro expressions appear very briefly and usually in high risk situations. Now, eye contact, of course, is part of facial expressions in a sense, right, where your eyes are directed, and generally, eye contact is a sign of engagement or involvement. And eye contact is itself a really kind of a weird thing, right? It has a tremendous impact on our communication. We know that servers who make eye contact, waiters and waitresses, generally make higher tips. We know that communicators who make eye contact are far more likely to get others to do what they want. We know that eye contact can be used as an expression of interest in another person, oftentimes romantic interest, right? And we also know that eye contact can be a sign of dominance. I heard this one time from a dog trainer who told me if you look your dog in the eye, if you get into a staring contest with your dog and the dog doesn't look away first, then the dog doesn't respect you. Then you're not the alpha in the relationship. So clearly, eye contact can be a sign of dominance. And we see this too. It points, if you've ever dealt with your parents and they say, "Look at me when I'm talking to you," right? That's a sign of dominance, and they want you to exhibit not only a certain fealty to them, but also that you're engaged with their message. Now, voice comes into play as well when we talk about nonverbal forms of messaging. So even though we use our voice to talk and to say words, we also vary things like tone, rate, how fast or slow we talk, our pitch, volume, our pauses, right? And all these things send messages. So with pauses, we talk about two types generally: unintentional pauses and vocalized pauses. So oftentimes we have unintentional pauses where we don't even realize that they're there, right? And at other times, we vocalize our pauses. So instead of just leaving empty space in the conversation, we say things like like, or you know. And when we do this, these kinds of vocalized pauses are generally known in communication as powerless speech, or disempowering speech. So what that means is that when we get up in front of a crowd and we say, right, it makes it seem like you don't know what you're talking about, that you lack a certain kind of authority or credibility, right? So generally, in my public speaking classes, for example, I tell students to try and avoid making these kinds of vocalized pauses. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about all these paralinguistic forms of messages is that we find that in studies, or in these studies, we find that when these paralinguistic elements remain, but we take out the content. So in other words, we have the speaker say something like blah, 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 right? So there's no words, but we ask them to change their pitch, their tone, their pauses, how quickly they speak, and so on. The people can still figure out the emotion that the speaker is trying to express, as well as how strongly they're feeling that emotion. So this goes with the notion that 90-some% of the emotion that's conveyed in words is actually conveyed by paralinguistic means. So in other words, it's done by things that aren't in the words themselves. And so we find that children, for example, respond to paralanguage before they understand language. So babies understand sadness or anger through the style of your speech well before they understand the actual words that we're saying. We also find that paralanguage is important in terms of relating to other people, and that we respond positively to communicators whose paralanguage matches our own. So we like people who speak in the way we do, in terms of how fast or how slow they speak, where they use their pauses, and so on. Now, touch is another form of non-linguistic communication, nonverbal communication. And the study of touch is known as haptics. Now, touch is another one of these qualities that seems to be almost magical in terms of its ability to communicate messages and affect change. So we've done all kinds of studies on touch, and we find some interesting things. For example, we know that people evaluate their partners more positively when they're touched by them. So if you touch your wife or your husband or your boyfriend or girlfriend, generally they're going to think more positively of you. We know that waiters and waitresses get better tips when they touch the hands and arms of their customers. We know that customers spend more time in stores and offer higher evaluations of those stores when they're touched by the staff. We know that customers are more likely to try samples when they're touched. So those crazy people that follow you around the mall trying to spray you with cologne or perfume, they probably do better if they touched you, right? You'd probably be more likely to try their perfume. Patients are more likely to take medicine if we touch them. We know that children who are born premature gain weight when they're touched. They have a tendency to thrive when they experience touch, right? We know that touching boosts the immune response in cancer and HIV patients. And we've even found that the touchiest teams, the teams that touch each other the most in the NBA, had the best records. So this is when I say there's kind of a magical quality to touch, this is why, right? It cements communication in a way and bolsters communication in a way that mere words can't. All right, so that's it for this first part of the lecture, and the next one we'll copy, rather we won't copy, but we'll cover some other types of nonverbal communication. Thanks for checking this out.